Okay, it is official. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to Sandy City Hall. It's so great to see you all here, bright and early. And of course, I welcome our state senators and representatives. Today we have State Senator Kurt Cullimore, Senator Kathleen Reeby, Representative Robert Spenlove, and Representative Steve Ellison, who are great representatives from Sandy. They care so much about our community and about each one of us. This is our 5th annual pre-legislative breakfast, so it's a bit of a tradition now in Sandy. And I'm so privileged to host this for our residents. We have a group here in the gallery at the council chambers, and also we have people attending online, and I welcome all of you. I'm Sandy Mayor Monica Zoltansky, and it's my privilege to host this event each year. So before we begin, I would like to introduce some important folks who work here, right here at the city. And I just want to let you know that you have immense resources right here at the city to connect on city issues and also to help connect with your state representatives. So we have some staff here. First is Deputy Mayor Kim Bell. Kim Bell is in the back, and she's my very right hand. City CAO Shane Pace. Shane is our city manager. We have Administrative Assistant Courtney Kuntz, who handles all the setup and prep work at the mayor's schedule. So if you need to get in touch with me or want an appointment with anyone in the city, Courtney is a great place to start. Our Public Affairs Director, Susan Wood. Susan Wood runs the city communications as the Public Information Officer and the Public Affairs Director. Our Government Affairs Liaison, Evelyn Everton. Evelyn, well, her job is like no other. Her job is to run herd or control our state legislators. If you need any help with that being controlled. Now, she's our liaison with our state and federal representatives. And also, we have Bill Simmons here, who is our federal delegation and our liaison for the city. I'd also like to recognize Canyon School District Government Affairs Liaison, Susan Edwards. Thank you, Susan, so much for being here, for all you do for our students and their families. And I welcome, of course, our Sandy City Council members. We have Council Chair Allison Stroud, Council Vice Chair Brian Meekum in the back, Council Member Scott Earl, Council Member Zach Robinson, back in the back, and Council Member Cindy Sharkey. And Councilmember D'Souza, thank you so much for being here, everyone. And then we also have peppered through quite a few city staff members. Our Community Development Director, James Sorensen. Thank you, James, for being here. Deputy CAO, Jared Gerber. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. So with those introductions, I just want to make a few short comments about why it is so important, and I'm so impressed that all of you have taken the time to be here. You know, an informed community is a powerful community. People who know what's coming down the pike, people who are talking to their neighbors and connecting in a lot of different ways throughout the community, people who know their state representatives and know the importance of the work of that service. That is a powerful community. An engaged community is a powerful community, and Sandy has always been that. And it's because we've had representatives who are available, accessible, approachable, and who truly care about meeting the needs of our residents. If you, whether you live from the Jordan River to the base of the Wasatch Mountains, you know that Sandy enjoys a quality of life that is unparalleled compared to any city along the Wasatch Front. We have the beauty, the business, the great neighborhoods and schools, the sense of civic pride, and just a great community of neighborhoods that know one another and care and help one another. We saw so much of that during our snowstorm this week. We had a 3-day storm total that was greater than any storm in 20 years. And we were so impressed. I was so impressed as mayor to see all of the examples of community members helping one another, neighbors checking on neighbors, shoveling walks, and then also the immense operations of our city services, the snowplows deployed, the parks crews working out, shoveling, digging out pathways, school crosswalks. Everybody was on deck. It was an all hands on deck experience, and We're still digging out a little bit. We still have more to do, and now we're working on potholes. But it's just because of this connection and engagement in our city that when big things happen, people get right to work and roll up their sleeves. But if you came to City Hall through State Street, on tracks, on I-15, you just enjoyed a state service, transportation. Transit and road transportation is a big part of our state's budget. If you put your child on a school bus this week, or went to a university class yourself, or a Salt Lake Community College class, you just enjoyed a state service, public education. If you turn your tap water on and are happy to see that there's clean water, you look out your window, pull back your curtains, enjoy the splendor of our mountain view, you've just enjoyed a state service. Water infrastructure, conservation, Great Salt Lake conservation. Go to state parks, you've enjoyed a state service. And these are the folks that we're going to hear from today who are in charge of allocating our tax dollars, yours and mine, to those state services. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Evelyn Everton, who will be introducing each one of our distinguished guests today. And we look forward to hearing from you. This is your chance to ask questions, your chance to get information. And I have just one goal from today, that you know who your state representative is, and you know how to contact your state representative. So in the back, we have maps of the state and Senate districts. Please take a look. And if you have, you know where your state district is, you'll know the number, you'll put the number together with the person. And then you'll be able to answer questions and direct your neighbors to those same resources. I'm so grateful to our state representatives for making time today on the eve of what is the most chaotic 45 days in our state's activity, the schedule for the year. It's like if you work in retail, the Christmas season, if you run parades, if you work the July season, it's everything all at once and condensed in 45 days. So it's incredible that they make time for us on the eve of such a busy experience, and they're here to hear from you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Evelyn. And thank you so much again for being here.
So we'll have the representatives and senators come on up, and we'll have you guys kind of sit where your name cards are. We'll turn the time over for Q&A for all of you folks that are here in the audience. We'll also allow some questions online. So if you do have some questions, please put those into the Q&A. I do want to excuse Representative Stoddard, who is also a legislator for us, and Representative Pulsifer. Representative Pulsifer had a baby blessing that she's attending, and Representative Stoddard had some legislative business. So when you're looking at your maps, and if you don't see your representative here, they may just be absent today, but do make sure you reach out to them. So have you come on up right now. So we have Senator Weeby, Senator Colomore, Representative Spindler, and Representative Elison. We're going to give them just a few minutes each just to introduce themselves, let you guys know what their committee assignments are, what their priorities are for this session, and then we will give we'll turn over to Q&A. And I do also want to excuse Senator Colmer. He will have to pop out a little bit early. He has a funeral that he's playing the organ for. So if you do have some questions directly for Senator Colmer, make sure you get those questions in earlier. All right, let's start with Senator Colmer.
Okay, thank you. I am Kurt Colomore, represent Senate District 19 now, so we changed the numbers this year with redistricting. This will be my second term as state senator. I am by day, I'm an attorney, work in the housing industry as well as personal injury stuff. My undergraduate degree though was in music, hence I'm playing the organ today. But I taught music for about 6 years before going to law school. I've got 6 kids from 19 down to 8. My oldest is in college down in Utah Valley now, but everybody else is in the Canyon School District. And so we're pretty involved with all of that and all of their activities and music and sports and all of that. And so that's what keeps me busy. I enjoy being in the state Senate. I serve as the majority assistant whip. As part of those duties, I'm on the Executive Appropriations Committee. I'm on the Infrastructure and General Government Sub-Appropriations Committee. And then for standing committees, I serve on Business and Labor, judiciary and law enforcement, and revenue and taxation.
Good morning. Thank you for coming, and thank you to those who are listening online. I'm Representative Steve Elison. I represent District 43 now, previously 45. It's kind of basically the north side of Sandy, to put it really simple. It includes a little part of Cottonwood Heights, Midvale, and a little bit of South Jordan, and White City. Starting my 7th term, and I currently am chairing the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. Previously, for the past several terms, I co-chaired the Public Education Appropriations Committee that funds our schools. I'm also on the Health and Human Services Committee, and I'm still on the Public Education Appropriation Committee, just not chairing it. By day, I work for the University of Utah Hospitals and Clinics as a senior director, and trained as a CPA, kind of a recovering auditor, you might say. I have six children, ages 14 to 26, and just barely a new grandchild. So that's a little bit about me, and look forward to having a good discussion today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Spendlow, and I'm going to apologize right now. I've got this dry cough that I've had for a month, so I might cough a little bit. I'm not sick. I represent District 42, which is essentially East Sandy. Pretty much everything east of 13th East is in my area, and I found out that I still represent one street of Cottonwood Heights, Water Vista Way. But then other than that, my entire district is Sandy. So I've served in the legislature since 2014. I've really enjoyed it. Representative Elison and I spend a lot of time together, and we serve on the same committees. So I serve on the Health and Human Services Committee. I serve on the Revenue and Taxation Committee, Public Education Appropriations Committee, and then also I am the Vice Chair of the Executive Appropriations Committee, and that's essentially just the budget committee for the legislature. Professionally, I'm an economist. I'm a senior economist for Science Bank, so I'm kind of a data geek, kind of looking at the revenues and kind of what's going on in the economy. I don't know if you were watching yesterday. No, I'll get into it later, but it was really interesting, the jobs report yesterday that came out and the market reaction to it. Let's see what, so we've lived in Sandy pretty much since I graduated from college in 1999. We first lived in historic Sandy, and then we've lived in kind of the Willow Creek area for the past 20 years. It's really funny. I have 4 kids. 3 of them have moved out, and 2 of my kids that have bought homes both moved into Sandy. So they both live in historic Sandy, one by Lone Peak Park, one a little bit further north in historic Sandy. And then I have a son at UVU. My daughter, my youngest, is a junior at Brighton. So it's great to be with you.
My name is Kathleen Beebe. I'm from Cottonwood Heights. I cover Cottonwood Heights, Midvale, and Sandy. My district is 15, it used to be 8, and I've moved further into Sandy with this new redistricting. I work as a teacher when I'm not a senator, and it's funny when people call me and I answer the phone, like, oh, I didn't know you'd answer. I'm like, you won't believe the things we do as senators up here. We do a lot of work, and it's an honor to serve with these 3 men. As a Democrat across the aisle, I can tell you that we have a really great relationship across the aisle with these gentlemen. They work really hard to come up with compromises. We have 1,000 bills that are written every year. 570 to 580 are numbered, and with that, 550 of them are voted on almost unanimously. So when you think about work that's done to make those things happen, that's incredible. So I give credit to these gentlemen particularly. They are really wonderful to work with. I have 2 children. They are both going to Brighton High School, and This is gonna be my 5th session prior to being on the Senate. In the Senate, I was on the state school board. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much. Okay, we can turn over to questions now. So just raise your hand. We're gonna maybe have to do a little trial and error to see if online can hear you. So maybe talk as loud as you can when you ask your question, and we can also repeat the question.
Yes, maybe just go down the row and tell them what their feel, ask them specifically about the gondola, and then just what your opinion is of that, and then what your other priorities are for the session.
So I live right at the mouth of Little Cottonwood Canyon, and I'm an avid skier. I've been skiing for 30 years in Alta, and my husband used to work up there. I recognize that Alta's and Snowbird and Brighton and Solitude are economic drivers for our communities. And I would never want to curtail their ability to do business, but I don't believe the gondola is going to solve the traffic problem that we have right now. As you drive out of my street, we have had people just camp there for hours and hours and hours. And when my kids were going to Brandon Elementary, they needed to have a police escort to get back and forth. So there needs to be something, but as you think about, like, do I need a gondola to go to the mall when Christmas happens? Do I need a gondola to go to the University of Utah football games? I mean, we have congestion sporadically for lots of events across the whole entire state and across the nation. I remember one time coming out of a Boston Red Sox game. I couldn't even get out of the parking lot for 3 hours because people were just walking in front of my car. So there needs to be dedicated lanes. There needs to be something that doesn't bring the traffic to the mouth of the canyon and the Wasatch corridor. I believe the solution needs to be further away, and it needs to have one transition. As a skier with little kids, I wouldn't want to put all of my stuff in my car, then put all of my stuff in the bus, then put all of my stuff on a gondola. I wouldn't even want to put my stuff in the car and then put it in the gondola. And the other problem I think about is if there's waiting times to get on the tram right now, and you're staying up to an hour, it's going to be an hour wait to get on the gondola because people are always moving in the same direction. So I think with technology and some of the new things we have with apps and reservations, there is another way that we can do this that would keep people in their car from idling less and provide a more fluid transition to up the canyons. Oh, my priorities for the next session. Thank you. See how they're so helpful. I'm a teacher, and so education has always been a strong priority for me. I'm working on some bills to prevent frustration in the classroom and try to get rid of some of the red tape that our teachers are dealing with. Another priority is some of our environmental concerns, some of our gun safety concerns, and then also with gun safety, I was hoping that we could create a time limit where they have to have a cooling period before they actually were able to purchase their weapons. And then also maybe raising the age for assault rifles. So nothing too drastic. Don't really feel that has a lot of legs to stand on, but I feel what's going on in our community, something needs to be done. So education, safety, building communities, and environment, just a few small things.
Thanks, and I forgot to mention, I want to thank Mayor Zoltansky and the City Council and the city for doing this, and Evelyn too. Evelyn like hounds us and says, "Are you coming? Are you coming?" Last night she texted me again, Are you still coming?" She does a great job. And really we are so fortunate to live in Sandy and to have the representation that we have at the local level. They do a great job. They're very committed. They have a great focus, and I just want to publicly thank you for what you do. So when you think about the gondola, and I've been saying this to everyone, I think we need to be really careful about how we talk about this issue, because so many people see it as a yes or no, and the message is getting out that it's a no from this area. And I think there's a lot of areas that we can come to a consensus and rally around solutions. It's not just gondola yes or no, there's a whole process that's being proposed. And I think almost everyone agrees on almost all parts of it. We need to increase bus service. That's not easy. It's going to take a lot of money to increase bus service to the canyons. infrastructure improvement in the canyons, creating new parking areas, closing down parking in areas that shouldn't be, increasing or creating a bus transit center at the mouth of Big Complet. That's a heavy lift. You know, creating the infrastructure up to the canyons. All these are really, really difficult things that will be hard to get support at the state level for. And then kind of the last step is once we've done all that, then if the canyon is still failing, then what do we do? And so my message has been, let's focus on the parts that we all agree on and get those done. And then, and I think this is probably 5 or 10 years down the road, then if the canyon is still failing, then we need to make the difficult decisions. And maybe it's gondola, maybe it's not, but you know, it's either gondola, or it's a train, or it's tunnels, or it's dedicated bus lanes, including avalanche sheds. None of these are easy. All of these are really, really tough. You know, the environmental impact of those avalanche sheds and the dedicated bus lanes is pretty big too. But I've been in the legislature now for almost 10 years, and we've been having this very discussion with no resolution for 10 years. And so we've got to figure out a solution, and we've got to come to it. And I just don't want the message, because what happens in the legislature is that there's 100 different big projects that are competing against this one. And if the message comes that Sandy doesn't support doing anything, then those other projects will bump up to the top and they'll just do nothing. You know, the path of least resistance is just to do nothing. And if the message is no one supports doing anything, then even that support and funding for bus infrastructure and infrastructure improvements and increased parking will go somewhere else. And so that's kind of where I'm focused my attention right now. In terms of my priorities, and I'm not going to steal the thunder from Representative Edelson because he's the lead, but one of the things we're really working a lot on is our tax and revenue system. On the revenue side, one of our biggest struggles is we're in a period of unprecedented uncertainty in our economy, where we've seen, and it's all because of the pandemic. The pandemic caused these enormous distortions in our economy. It changed our supply chain, it changed consumer demand, it changed our revenue collections. We expected that when the pandemic hit, that our revenue collections would collapse. And the exact opposite happened because the federal government stepped in and you know, gave us $6 trillion, right? And that's it. But that amount is so big that it's caused the inflation that we're seeing now. And so now the Fed is trying to pull back. They're trying to pull back on that money and slow down the economy. But now we run the risk of going into a recession. There's a very real risk that we'll go into a recession over the next year. And so we've got this historic amount of extra money at the state level, but then we're looking in the face of a potential recession. So how do you prepare for that kind of situation where, you know, everyone just says, well, you know, this is our new path. And we're saying, no, the path is about to do this. And so it's kind of preparing for that. And then the bottom line is when we've got so much extra revenue, essentially what we did was we took too much money from you. And so we needed to figure out the best way to give you back your money that we over collected over the last couple of years.
So as it relates to the gondola, at this juncture, just kind of cut to the chase, I'm opposed to it. Don't think I don't like skiing. I taught skiing from the University of Utah. I ran the bill to make skiing and snowboarding the official winter sports of Utah. And I was up skiing this week, and just a few observations. There's a lot we should be doing right now, regardless of what we do with the gondola. They've cut the bus service in half, and we are having, you know, maybe what you could say a record ski season. I saw one of the buses pull into Solitude, and my son, who's with me, said, Dad, I rode the bus recently. I don't want to get on that bus again. He's like, you're shoulder to shoulder, doesn't smell good, and you get car sick. I mean, and then he wrote up the lift with somebody who said, they've written the bus up and they said the bus driver says they won't give us extra shifts when we want them. So I'm like, why are we currently restraining the supply of buses when that we know that instantly gets people off the road? So looking at what we can do, currently we have one of the largest resorts not charging for parking. That changes people's behavior right there. So I think we need to look immediately what we can do to address the congestion. But I think that such a large project to use taxpayer dollars is a difficult thing for me. In terms of session priorities, what Robert alluded to was tax reform bill. We collected several extra $1 billion, combination of one-time and ongoing money over what we had expected. And there is a very strong consensus that a lot of that money should be given back to the people who paid it, all of you. Now, keep in mind, some of those funds, the state is several $1 billion in debt. We have to balance our budget, but for long-term capital projects like roads and buildings, we bond for those. We borrowed money at less than 2%. So we're setting aside a significant sum of money to retire those bonds in the future. We'll actually earn interest on those funds as we set them aside, kind of arbitrage, which will free up the state budget in the future. But we are looking at a combination, and as chair of revenue tax, happen to be running the bill that will be the major tax cut bill. Robert is really key on this and looking for lots of feedback. I've had a Facebook post out for a while, getting a lot of great feedback from constituents about what they think we should cut taxes. And you know, a lot of it's from people's perspective. You know, some want Social Security cut tax, earned income tax credits, rate cut, sales tax on food. I predict you won't see just one type of tax cut. You'll see a variety that can benefit people all along the income spectrum. So that'll be a big focus this session. I have 7 bills numbers so far. One is a bill that I've been working on with the Behavioral Health Crisis Response Commission to continue further change our system of responding to people with behavioral health, mental health emergencies. Instead of sending them to an emergency room, calling the police, or sending them to jail, Utah's been a leader in the nation to redesign how we can do that with someone to call, someone to respond, and a safe place to go. So that's Crisis Line 988, the Utah Warm Line, mobile crisis outreach teams, and our statewide network of crisis receiving centers, some of which are open, some of which are under construction. So one of my bills is the kind of next step that the guiding commission says we need to do to expand that network. I do have a bill on education. We've had a lot of learning loss through the pandemic, and with a lot of this one-time money, I'm going to be proposing that we put grant money out there for school districts to extend the school year for students that need to make up learning loss, and give teachers the opportunity that desire to work through the summer to mitigate some of that learning loss. I got a number of other bills, but just for sake of keeping things succinct, I'll leave it at that and turn to Senator Collins.
Okay. One thing I'd like to point out about the gondola situation is that this began as an administrative process, and still is, that UDOT's going through. And this started long before I was even in the legislature. And so the recommendation that they had that came out earlier this summer, where they proposed a gondola, and even that proposal said the gondola would be in 5 to 7 years from now. That's really just another step in the administrative process. There's a comment period that I believe is open right now, and then there'll be a window of time for lawsuits through the federal government process, which are inevitable. And so much like Legacy Highway, I don't foresee this being an issue before the legislature anytime soon, because really what will come before the legislature is funding. It is a request to fund the solution if UDOT ultimately ends up recommending the gondola when that time comes per their EIS process and the administrative process. And so my commitment has always been to not support funding for something that does not have broad support. And at this time, obviously, in our area, we all live pretty close to that. There's not broad support for a gondola. And so I guess my answer to that is there's still a lot of time between now and the time that UDOT is asking the legislature to fund whatever the ultimate solution is. And so I would say to everybody, just remain engaged, remain involved. There's still opportunity to speak to the solutions. And so we'll just continue to kind of watch this play out, and then it'll get before the legislature at some time, but even based on the proposal, it's not for another 5 years at least. So priorities for this year. One thing that's been pretty interesting to me, well, first off, it's kind of interesting to hear from Representative Spindlove and Representative Elison, because we've had a lot of tax discussions as well, and I'm not sure that the House and Senate have really coordinated those talks and efforts yet. Well, at least the discussions I've been, I know. Senator McKay is the Rev and Tax Chair on the Senate side, and so I've been in a lot of meetings with him, and the focus on our side has been a little bit different, though not totally misaligned from what they said. One thing that a lot of people have felt is the pain of the property tax increase, and so we've heard from a lot of constituents that want that to be addressed. And when you look at property taxes, it's a pretty small portion that actually goes to the state. And so what the state can do to reduce your property tax immediately would probably not be very significant, because where we saw the big property tax increase was in the assessments. We saw, going back to what Robert talked about with the pandemic and how it's created all this fluctuation in the economy, we saw residential properties spike a lot over the past couple of years, which has caused property tax on the residential side to absorb a lot more of the revenue as opposed to commercial. And so with property taxes, you have this fluctuation between residential and commercial. And what we've seen is residential take on a lot more of that burden. And so what we've talked about is what policies can the state pass to kind of regulate that fluctuation. And so inevitably, as property tends to increase, as it always does, the hope is that we don't see these big spikes in property tax, and then maybe a drop, and then another big spike. What I think that most people would appreciate is some moderation, and most people can understand that property values increase over time. But if we can create some policies that would allow for the property taxes to kind of steadily increase with the valuation, as opposed to having these big spikes and valleys, that might be some good policy to pursue. So that's one thing that we're looking at the state level with property taxes. Another thing that's I've been involved in is social media regulation, particularly among minors. A lot of studies have come out over the last couple of years that show the ill effects of social media upon our kids, and that the detrimental effect it has on their mental well-being, on their emotional state, and all of that is every bit as harmful as alcohol, drugs, those types of substances. And yet there's virtually no regulation at all on social media. And so we're looking at what can we do on a state level to address that. And some bills that we're looking at will go from an all-out ban on social media. Anders, an all-out ban on social media for minors, which imposes some constitutional issues with interstate commerce and freedom of speech and stuff like that, but we think there is some room to do that. Going from an all-out ban to heavily regulating this and saying that there has to be age verification for social media websites, and that we already have federal law, it's called COPA, the Child Online Protection Act, that regulates this for 13 and under, but between 13 to 17 or 18, it's a free-for-all right now. It's saying if we can require age verification, then anybody between the age of 13 and 17 would have to have parental permission to get an account, and then the parents would have unfettered access to that account to restrict time usage, to restrict what content's being viewed, to restrict who is contacting them, so that there would be no direct messaging to minors from people that they are not directly friends with. What are some of the other things? You can shut it. A parent would have an unfettered right to shut it down. And so, and then if the social media companies don't allow for that, there would be a private right of action to where a citizen, a parent, or anybody can sue that social media company for violation of the law and for any detrimental effects that it might have upon their kids. So I think that's critically important. In fact, the governor's holding a symposium next Tuesday on social media and social media regulation and the effects it has on our kids. And so we've been working closely with the governor's office on that, and kind of excited to see where this goes. A couple other states have started this, but there's no states really that have implemented widespread regulation upon the social media companies. So Utah is somewhat leading out on this right now.
Great, thank you. I think we're gonna go really quick to an online question and then we'll go back to the audience.
Yes, we have a question from Erica Munson, specifically for Representative Spendlove. She says, I am concerned about the bill proposed by Senator Kennedy that would forbid parents from allowing medically advised gender-affirming surgery for their children with gender dysphoria. This can be a life-saving treatment. It seems inconsistent with the rights of Utah parents that they have in other areas of their children's medical care. Without getting into the weeds of this particular bill, what are the values you bring to the conversation about transgender and parental rights?
Thanks, that's a great question. And this is a subject that we've been talking about in our Health and Human Services Committee quite a bit. It's hard to talk about this without getting into the weeds. So when you're talking about gender transformation, there's different types and it has different effects depending on people's ages. So what this bill is specifically talking about is gender transformation of minors, so children under 18. And there's kind of two different types of treatments that are offered. There's medical procedures that would be essentially removing sexual organs, or I suppose adding sexual organs too. And then also medical treatments, really puberty blockers. And so if you think about the difference between those two, it is a huge difference, right? If you remove sexual organs or alter sexual organs, it's really difficult to undo that change. If you give medication, it will have an impact. We're not sure if that impact will be long-term. And there's ongoing debate about whether those treatments have long-term impacts. There's a really interesting New York Times article that came out a couple months ago about the long-term impacts, about decades later. So in the Scandinavian countries, they've been performing these procedures for a couple decades, and they are finding that there are some long-term impacts of stopping the puberty process during puberty. But Senator Kennedy's bill is specifically talking about the medical procedures, specifically saying that for children under 18 years old, that those medical procedures would not be allowed. And then there would be a heightened requirement for the treatment procedures. I'll just tell you I support the bill, and here's the reason I do. I think we don't know this area very well, and his focus is mostly on the surgical procedures. And I think it is important for us to have a justifiable process in place for those for all those treatments as well. We don't want there to be long-term negative impacts. I think there's a lot of study that needs to be done in this area, a lot of better understanding. And I'll just give you one example. Right now, essentially, any physician can not the surgery, but any physician can prescribe these treatments. I really think it needs to be someone who's specialized, like a pediatric endocrinologist. That this is what they do. And so I think if you want to have these procedures, I think there needs to be a level of assessment. I think there needs to be counseling. You know, these kids are really struggling. And I think so you need to have this level of counseling, working with the parents, a process to move toward it. And then if it is medically necessary to do this, then have a specialist that knows this area performing these or diagnosing and treating this gender dysphoria. So sorry, she said not to get into the weeds, but I can help it. So.
Great, thank you. Let's go into audience now.
My name's Aaron Kaiser. I just want to say this is my first Sandy City legislative session, and I just appreciate the really candid responses from all of you. On the gondola, real quick, I just feel concerned about the non-mention of the phased approach, which is what Mayor Zoltansky and our county mayor support, and which I hope you include in your language moving forward. I'm critical of the mindset of it has to be a tunnel or a gondola or road expansion or whatever, because I think the phased approach would solve, maybe you allude to that in increasing our busing or whatever, but even as UDOT admits, eliminating single occupancy vehicles would solve the problem like that. And we could use data and technology, apps, whatever, and save that $600 million for something more important like the Great Salt Lake. So my question is to all of you, what is going to happen after BYU's new report that says we've got this legislative session basically to focus on conservation efforts, so I don't have to list my house this spring.
To the first part, I agree. I think that there are many other solutions we have to building roads, gondolas, but I also agree with infrastructure. Our canyons don't have the infrastructure. We need more bathrooms. I mean, more people are going up the canyon than they've ever gone before. People are accessing the canyons 24/7. 2 years ago, my husband and I were up there at 10 o'clock at night. We had people hiking Superior in the middle of the night. And so we have to understand that it's a beautiful place that people want to access. And I want to create a situation where they can access it as easily as possible. But I don't believe major changes to the beauty of the canyons are necessary. I think technology, apps, parking restrictions, many other solutions are available. When we talk about this saying that it's 10 years old, if you go back, you can see in 1970, they were looking for solutions for these problems. So it's over 50 years old, you know. To the second part, the Great Salt Lake, there has to be something done. It has to be big steps. We need to be moving big boulders right now for that. Fortunately, we're having a super wet cycle this year, so maybe that'll give us a little bit more time. Dealing with nature is always a struggle because sometimes it's erratic. You know, I mean, last year we had a terrible year, and this year we're having a tremendous year. So some of the things that we've looked at is, you know, what's using the most water and trying to mitigate those types of crops. And we're still in process. I wish I had a better answer for that, but coupling that with other states that also use our water, it's a very intricate conversation, but we do need to take both steps. I would agree.
Anyone else want to add to Great Salt Lake?
Well, I'll just say real quickly, you may not be aware of the things the legislature had done last session. We did invest significant funding in water metering. Robert and I were at a meeting last week, had an update on how effective that is actually working, where agricultural users are now being made aware and held a bit more accountable to how much they're using. And so there's only so many things we can do. I wish that we could pass a bill, you know, requiring so many inches of rainfall every year. I've been in some of the meetings where, you know, we talked about, we build a pipeline from the Pacific. They're looking to do that in California with the Salton Sea. I mean, there's all sorts of, do we bring more water through the Central Utah Project, our share from the Colorado River into the Great Basin? It's a little bit problematic because the Colorado River doesn't have enough water for the downstream users as it is. But there's not going to be one single solution. It's going to be a lot of different solutions. For instance, do we let Amax magnesium dredge the canal so more water can go out of the Great Salt Lake to the evaporation ponds. Personally, don't think that's a good idea. So we'll continue to focus, and if you have specific ideas, please contact us and let us know, because we have to think very broadly because there's no easy solutions to this.
And you mentioned listing your house because of the toxic dust that we're talking about. Is that what you're alluding to? So we are trying to mitigate the impact of the salt bed so that it isn't creating those dusts. I'm exploring an idea of not only having a protection for the Great Salt Lake, but also protecting the shoreline, because if you name it, you protect it. And so it's very different ecosystems, and I'm trying to reach out to interested groups to find out if that's something that would be more beneficial and aligned with the movement that we're trying to make. So we are very aware, we are really very concerned, and I know on both sides of the aisle, we are working to come up with solutions.
So the water issue is such an interesting example of public policy. There are, okay, I'm gonna be a little, put air quotes, there are easy solutions, right? The easy solution is just ban all agriculture in Utah, right? Agriculture takes 80% of our water. We export a third of that product. So we're exporting our water out of the state. It's less than 1% of our GDP. So it would have, it's, the hay industry in Utah is smaller than the industries that take minerals out of the Great Salt Lake. So on paper, it's easy, right? You just get rid of agriculture. But then when you get on the ground, you're like, okay, if we were to actually do that, we would destroy communities throughout the state. And they have cultural, historic, and legal protections. They've been, working this land for generations. And do we just go to them and say, well, when you look at the state GDP, you don't really matter, right? And so then you have to say, okay, and the reason we're in this situation is there's a number of different reasons, but environmental, our environment is changing, and also cultural. We have not developed a culture of careful stewardship of our environment. We've essentially been overusing water for 150 years. And it didn't matter because we had more water than we could use. But now we've flipped, and we're now in a period where we're having to change our behavior. We live in a desert, but we landscape like we live in New England. We've got to change that. We can't all have a third of an acre of Kentucky bluegrass. When we live in the desert, you have to look around you and say, what does the environment around me look like? And that's what my yard needs to look like. And there do need to be some difficult decisions about agriculture. We do need to be saying, is it appropriate to have 100 acres of hay surrounded by land that's so dry that nothing will grow on it? But it's going to take time, and I think we need to mitigate those impacts to those that are affected. Those farmers that have been working this land for generations, we need to figure out a way to make them whole. And one other just quick example, we were talking about this the other day. What works, even in our state, we have two main basins, right? So we have the Great Basin, which drains into the Great Salt Lake, and then we have the Colorado River Basin, where it all drains into the Colorado River. What works in the Great Basin doesn't work in the Colorado River Basin, and vice versa. So they're really pushing in St. George to reuse water, essentially take wastewater and reuse. Excuse me. If you do that in the Great Basin, it's the worst thing you can do, because if you reuse that water, it's not going into the Great Salt Lake, and it makes the problem worse. And so we really need to look at this, changing our paradigm, but also recognizing the individual circumstances within our state.
I'll try to add something. Yeah, I'm very encouraged. I mean, my short time in the legislature so far, and being involved before that. Obviously, the conversation has turned a lot over the past year. In addition to the secondary water metering that we invested in last year, there was about $400 million of one-time monies into water issues, water conservation, setting up the trust for the Great Salt Lake, and a lot of those efforts. And so I'm encouraged by that and think that that's going to continue into the future. There are a lot of things that we can do, like for agriculture. I'm encouraged by former Representative Joel Ferry is actually a rancher, and he is now the director of DNR, the Department of Natural Resources. And he was instrumental actually in creating the Great Salt Lake Trust and the program that would allow ranchers to lease their water to the state, basically, so that it encourages the downflow to the Great Salt Lake. And so he's got great ideas about other ways that we can conserve water and develop water in the state of Utah. Agriculture needs to be looking at drip systems. There was a trade mission to Israel and Dubai, obviously very arid climates, where they demonstrated that some of the drip systems they have for agriculture use about 25% of the water that we do through flood irrigation and sprinklers and stuff like that, and yield about 50% more crops. And so there's a lot of things out there, a lot of new innovation that we can take advantage of to retain the culture that we have through agriculture, and still conserve. And then also, just because the conversation has turned, you've seen a lot of people be more cognizant of their water use, which is really the aim of the whole secondary water metering. But even those of us who don't have free gray water, basically, by being more cognizant of our use, we've saved hundreds of millions. And I won't quote the numbers because I've already forgotten, but just in the Sandy and Salt Lake Water District, hundreds of millions of gallons of water were saved this year just because people adjusted their use. And that's reflective of how water was throughout the state. And so a lot of the things that Robert talked about, changing our habits, changing our use, changing our landscaping, will make a big difference. And I'm sure there'll be significant investments into water conservation again this year.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on that. I have heard that there are probably more funding for the Flip the Strip program, which if you guys have taken advantage of that, certainly something to look to. I know Councilmember Runs has done that himself. So great. Next question. Yes.
So because of the gondola, I think a lot of UDOT has looked at a lot of different alternatives. And one of the things that I didn't really see them looking at was we have an infrastructure already in place, parking lots, huge parking lots that aren't even being parked in. And I see them all over the area in East Sandy. So for example, 2000 East and Walgreens is there in 9400 South. There's a parking area with bus stops already in place. It's hardly ever any cars in it. So even on big ski days, so why are we looking at using some of those already? And then there's other big parking lots that aren't being used right off the highway. Why couldn't we put a bus stop at some of these places and use them? So just alternatives that are already there.
I think those are great ideas. It kind of goes back to my comment earlier, is that UTA has cut bus service in half. So right now our bottleneck from a kind of production operations efficiency perspective isn't parking lots, it's buses. The bus I saw earlier this week was jam-packed. And so they're finding places to park and getting on buses, but I think in the short term we need to work with UTA to say, what do we need to do to increase the bus service, because that's the immediate issue right now.
And I had a second question about how much is being influenced by the bid, Utah's bid for the Olympics in 2030 that this gondola built.
No, that's not.
It's not related.
Since when we had the last Olympics, we do not have the capacity, I think, to have the events in Little Cottonwood if it can be Cottonwood County. So the Olympics would not be driving that. As far as the parking lots, it's a very interesting point, and one I brought up numerous times as well. We are using old-fashioned solutions in any wage. And I agree that we should be looking towards something else. I know that Wasatch Backcountry has a bunch of vans that they use, and they've gotten together themselves to create a free service in a van where they all participate in using a van that takes them up the canyon. I've reached out to Mayor Burke up in Alta, and I asked, why are we waiting for UDOT to solve our problems? We should have a van that takes us directly up to Alta. I mean, it's a huge economic boon for Alta to have those skiers there, and maybe they should solve their own problems and create their own van system. So, I mean, these things are new solutions that are not that outrageous, but it's just like what we should have a bus. And I believe a dedicated lane that gets us from point A to point B, where I live right at the mouth of the canyon. I bought my house 22 years ago. It used to take me 5 minutes to get up the canyon. It now takes me 2 hours. And if I'm in a bus, if it takes me 15 minutes to drive, it takes me 45 minutes to an hour to be on the bus. No one's gonna get on a bus that takes longer than their car. That's just the way it is. And then we also have the last mile. When people talk about that gondola, like, oh, I'm just gonna walk over to that gondola. I'm like, you're not gonna walk over that gondola carrying all your stuff. That makes no sense, you know? Like, we have to be realistic. So I do believe that there are some efforts across the valley where parking lots that are used through the week, 9 to 5, are actually converted to bus stops. And it's not used as much as it should be, but we should start looking at that more. And UDOT is actually negotiating a contract with their bus drivers. So, I mean, it's a power struggle with employees and employees all across the nation in every industry, and this is just one that's having that same struggle. Lastly, we need to start thinking about just escaped me, I'm so sorry, but there are lots of different solutions, and I agree with you. We should start looking at all.
What, and I'll just add quickly, one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about is the way to really force people to use the buses is to shut down the canyons. You know, that's what they did in Zion National Park. And so, oh, Vermont does that too?
Yeah.
So again, that's an option, or you could have a toll where every car is $50. You know, if we did those type of things, then it would force those. And that certainly, and I believe the UDOT proposal does include tolling, but I don't think they said an amount. But so yeah, I think every option needs to be on the table in order to deal with this.
Just to have an update, that's, we're talking so much about busing. Salt Lake County has a proposal in front of the county council on Tuesday to augment the UTA bus system by working with Visit Salt Lake and Salt Lake County and Sandy to fund and coordinate private shuttle bus service to coordinate the lack of the ski bus schedule or the reduction in the ski bus schedule. So please stay tuned and tune into the Salt Lake County Council meeting on Tuesday afternoon. They have it online. You can vote in and participate and ask if they support that initiative. So thank you. That's just a quick update.
All right, no more questions online. Okay. Anyone else questions? Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this is your responsibility or not, but how do we stop scam calls? I can get 5 to 6 a day. And trust me, I answer because I love using it. And we have arguments.
Maybe just repeat your question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay, the question was, how do we stop scam calls? And they're a serious issue. One of my neighbors was defrauded significantly. So that's something that as the legislature is really difficult for us to regulate because that's under the auspices of the Federal Communication Commission. I will just tell you what I do personally. You can go to the do not call website, put your number in for whatever that's worth. I think it helps some, but it's not foolproof. However, almost every time I get a scam call, if I'm sitting at my desk at work, I just go to that website and you can report that phone number. And then that is, if you don't report it, they'll just keep doing it. And
The number comes in as an 801. And then I ask him, I said, what's?
Well, I report the number that it comes in on. I'm just telling you what I do personally.
I dial it back and that number's not in service.
I know.
Yeah.
It's a disconnected number, so.
Yeah,
Short of
and
my
then
blood
every time
pressure.
I block him on my phone. So unfortunately, there's not an easy answer to the state. We share your frustration, I assure you.
Personally.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to ask that? No. Councilmember Robinson.
Thanks, Evelyn. I appreciate all the responses regarding the conservation issues that you're facing, but one question just kind of popped in my mind that I'm hoping you can all share your perspective on is, can you share the pulse of the legislature as it pertains to development and potentially incentivizing developers to come in with proposals that would have a very minimal environmental impact? So water reduction measures, different ways to energize these developments, because we're seeing a lot of developments across the entire state. That's no secret to anybody. It's something that we deal with here in this room quite frequently. But one thing that would be really great is if there was some sort of incentive from the state to provide, some sort of benefit for developers as they come in with these projects that minimize the environmental impact. So the question I'm really asking is there a pulse up on the Hill to do something along those lines, or do you see that as something that we need to deal with on a city level?
I'll kick it off. I think this is going to be one of the major themes of this legislative session. And so that there is a real problem in our state of affordable housing. And we've seen housing prices go up so dramatically. It's really difficult, especially for those low income and first time home buyers to be able to get into a home. And there is, so I'm just going to start off by saying Sandy's not the problem. Sandy City is not the problem, but there is a lot of frustration in the legislature at the state level about local government preventing the kind of solutions that they think needs to happen. And so what we're talking about is we're talking about density, right? The solution to affordable housing is more density. And a lot of, in too many areas, there's an anti-density mindset. And I don't know whether it's elected officials or whether it's constituents, but if we want to get serious about addressing this problem, we've got to say, how do we develop housing options for all stages of life? We can't just have I'm back to the third of an acre with Kentucky bluegrass, right? It's great to have, a 3,000 square foot house with a 3-car garage on a third of an acre. That doesn't work for everyone. What about your kids that are just starting off that may want to live in an apartment or a condo, or your parents who are later in life that want to live in an apartment or a condo, or your neighbor who just graduated from college and can't afford a $700,000 house? Too often, the too many communities only want that one solution of that third of an acre house. And we've got to change that. And whether it's through subsidizing low-income housing, or if it's through changing zoning requirements. So in a lot of areas, again, not Sandy, but in a lot of areas, it is impossible to build density because of zoning requirements or because of restrictions that make it impossible to develop these kind of options. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion about that this year in the legislature.
So Robert talked a lot about the push and pull between the state and local zoning. And so, there's a reluctance to step on local zoning authority because, Sandy and whatever city generally knows best about how to develop within their own city boundaries. And like you said, Sandy does a very good job of deciding, hey, it's appropriate for high density here, maybe not here, and doing that. But we can't trust, unfortunately, all cities are not created the same. And so we have those issues, but I want to talk more about every year there's a look at building code as well. And it's been about 11 years since Utah's building code has significantly been updated. And so there is some look into that, and that addresses air quality issues, water conservation issues. And so the give and pull on building code stuff is, well, if we require too much, we're already dealing with housing affordability. We don't want to increase the cost of building and the cost of housing by making building code overly burdensome. Yet at the same time, there are these pressing issues on a state and regional level that we need to address air quality issues and water conservation issues. And so there will be some look into the building code stuff this year. How far we get is still to be determined, but yeah, Zach, you've kind of touched on that perennial fight, or not really a fight, but the perennial struggle between local zoning, building code, housing affordability, all of that's always at play.
So the other part about this is that we have a short-term rental issue that's going on, and that is exacerbating our housing shortage. In Cottonwood Heights, I know that there are many people that are using Airbnbs and short-term rentals, and so we have a lot of houses that are sitting vacant. And they're getting the property tax, but we're also not getting the hotel taxes from people going to hotels where it's more regulated and it's more conducive to our environment to have those short-term rentals in that kind of situation. So I think that there is work that needs to be done to make sure that we're building houses responsibly. And I think Andrew passed a bill, was it 2 or 3 years ago, that you had to stagger how you were going to build your housing and make sure that you were making housing affordable for every level of the demographics. But you know, the more houses we build, if they're just going to become second homes, and we're just going to still have this problem. So I think part of that solution is looking at our short-term rentals and how they're being used and how we can mitigate how many we have in our communities. These short-term rentals are also causing a big draw on our police departments and our infrastructure for like roads that we're just really not using that resource responsibly. So there's so many layers to housing and building that needs to be looked at. I think that many of the solutions we've talked about already, talking about a mindset, you know, I live in a house and I don't share it with anyone, and it's a third of an acre, and I probably have some Kentucky bluegrass I'm trying to get rid of. And but it's hard because that's your image in your head of what's success in the States. And you know, the other layer that really concerns me is when you don't have a house, you don't have shelter, you don't have that security and that connection to your community. If you're constantly in a state of flux and you're not living in a place that's your own, you don't have a second mortgage option if something happens in your life. So your house is actually your anchor, it's your lifeline. I remember Carol Spackman Moss, who's a representative for Holiday, and I was talking about, she got divorced 30 years ago. Her house was the thing that saved her. And if you're looking at people who can't afford a house, they can't afford a lifeline. They can't afford security. And that's really a detriment to our society when you are not connected to your community that way. So I look at it in so many different levels, but thank you for that question.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the electeds that came today. Congratulations on you that re-won their election bids, so congratulations. Senator Reeby, you nailed it perfectly. That's what I'd like to talk about is affordable housing. So here's the deal. I'm in my 30s. I have a great paying job, but I can't compete in the market. Rent's going up. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that are in similar situations that can't compete with how the housing market is looking. So now I'm looking at places where Decatur, Alabama, where I could get a 5-bedroom house, 3 bathrooms for $250,000. Looking at places like Myrtle Beach, California, South Carolina, I could live a mile away from the beach for a house that's $200,000. How do we get people in my situation to stay here in Utah and not leave our talents to another state?
So nice to have you here. You know, I think that when we were talking about our taxing going on here, and I think that most of us really would like some of those problems solved. And I know that I'm not well up in middle class, but I'm secure. And so when I think about getting a tax return that might be $50 to $200, like I don't really want that. I would rather have my community be more stable. And so when I think about restructuring our taxes, I'm looking at creating more opportunities for the young people in our community. I think that we can use some of that money that we have in the state because, you know, in Utah, we are like the beacon of what we've done right through the pandemic. We are just crushing it in so many levels. but that's something that we're not. The homelessness and the housing insecurity is a really big draw on our communities. You know, like I was mentioning, like just the instability of moving all the time is really hard for our kids when they go from school to school. Trying to figure out the buses when you move from house to house, trying to maintain a car and move your family all the time. This is also adding trauma to our communities. So before I would want to spend any money towards taxes as a rebate or reducing my taxes, I would like to see that we bring more stability to our communities by investing in our communities, investing in housing situations. And, you know, the market's going to drive how much a house costs, and that's just part of it. But if we can prevent people from having second homes or taxing those at a different rate or preventing Airbnbs from popping up everywhere, I think that would stabilize the market a little bit for the people that are looking for those opportunities. So it's not just an easy fix. It has to be looked at from lots of different angles and working to create more security in our communities where more people can stay and thrive. And so I wish I had an easy answer for you, but I don't.
I'll say what the problem you address touches on almost everything we've talked about so far today. You know, the easy answer, which is not easy, is this is a supply and demand issue. And the only way that we can create more supply is we've got to build up our infrastructure. We've got to build up our water conservation. I mean, Tooele County could be we could have a boom there and have all sorts of development, but we're constrained by water out there. And so we've got to figure out that water issue. We've got to figure out water development. We've got to get the infrastructure going out to the west part of Utah County, because there's a lot of land if we can figure out the infrastructure and the water and all of that, because ultimately that's what's going to reduce housing affordability and address that problem, is just making more housing available. And so you will see sizable investments in infrastructure, and we are certainly growing out there. And I think one thing that will help with that is the ability to work from home. You know, if anything good came out of the pandemic, it's how much we're able to do remotely now, and people can live an hour away from the city center, and it's fine so long as they've got the infrastructure, they've got the grocery stores and the hospitals and all of that. And so, you know, all these significant investments into infrastructure, I think, will help with that, but it's a long-term solution. We've seen almost $2 billion of new money put in infrastructure just the last 2 years on top of our already existing infrastructure budget. And so we're working towards it, but again, water infrastructure, I think, is ultimately what then leads to housing availability, which helps with the housing affordability.
I had lunch yesterday with a former Senator Wayne Niederhauser, who used to represent part of this area, and this is the discussion we're talking about. Predict you will see a significant housing bill this session. I'm working with him on a pretty major homeless bill and deeply affordable housing. I mean, there's different levels. It's one thing, like, you know, my oldest son just bought a home, and it was really expensive and a huge stretch. But there's a lot of people currently in shelters that just need to get into an apartment. And so looking at how we get people out of, help them step out of homelessness and into housing is yet another area. We will be heavily focused on that. I know that's not your issue per se, but it is part of the spectrum that we have to focus on. So it's a difficult issue, and just know that we are continually thinking and doing as much as we can.
Okay, I think I saw over here. No, anyone else?
I almost hate to transition back to the transit issue. Thank you for coming. Media is reporting that there doesn't seem to be legislative support for Governor Cox's kind of surprising but pretty provocative idea of providing free public transit for a year. Seemed like the if I read it correctly, it seemed like the fiscal price tag was about $25 million. I love a good social experiment. I'm just kind of curious. We've been talking about congestion. We've been talking about driving people to use public transit. It seems like that kind of meshes there. seems like there could be wide benefits to get people, provide an incentive to use public transit that maybe drives a behavioral change. I'm curious as to whether the media reports are correct, that there may not be legislative support, and just why not? Is there a reasoning behind that?
I will start out by saying, I love to hear when the media says, well, the legislature doesn't, I'm like, we're not even in session. I'm like, I don't know who, maybe they're doing a poll of everybody, not including me. So I'm just gonna, on the outset, say, I don't know where they're getting their data from, because until a week from Tuesday, we're not in session. I will say there was a bill, was it Lynn Hemingway or somebody, one of our colleagues years ago brought up a bill, and I do remember the discussion at the time that, and we've had sometimes free fair days, and you don't see ridership spike. In my case, I tried riding tracks for a while, and the extra time it took to get to the track station, waiting there, and the whole thing wasn't enough in my situation where I work to change behavior. I don't think the cost of the fare will change many people's behavior. Like this morning, if we would have said UTA is free this morning, just ask yourself how many of you would have ridden the bus and figured out the map and the connections to get here. So I'm sure we'll have a vigorous discussion on it. It's not that it's a bad idea to consider. The question is will we get the bang for our buck? Because even though we do have a lot of extra money this session, there are going to be 5 times the number of requests for those funds that we have available. So the question would be, can that be better used putting a carpool lane in some place, or redoing an interchange? That's a huge bottleneck, which UTA has this huge list of projects. And if we use the money on free transit, then over in this other area, that project will get pushed. So just a few thoughts.
So I looked to see what it would be like for me to take the transit here today. It took me 22 minutes to get here. For me to take a bus and walk a little bit would be an hour and 34 minutes. So that is a big problem, but I support free transit. I think it's one of the things that we could do to really get people out of their cars if it became tenable for them. I would definitely use transit if it was adding 10 minutes, it was adding 15, but adding an hour and 10 minutes isn't really reasonable. I think that on the east side, we don't have as many options. We definitely need to expand the transit through the east side of the valley, and I would love to see that happen in a more efficient rate. But I would support free transit. I think that we have the money this year, we have the ability to do it, and I think that would be a great service for most of our community. And I'd love to see the difference in our, I think we've done it for a week, we've done it for a day. That doesn't really change your mind. If you can make that plan for a year and really change your habits for a year, that could possibly work. And I would like to see the data on that.
So I'm open to it. And I think Steve's right. There hasn't been a response from the legislature, but I have heard some of the concerns. I don't necessarily share them, but I'll just let you know what they are. I know that Albuquerque did this, and they had a huge problem of homeless people riding the buses. Just kind of taking over the buses. If you don't have some kind of way to be able to enforce some kind of rules, they did have that problem. So that's been one of the concerns I've heard from the rural members. They say, well, this is just an urban solution to urban people, and what about those areas of the state? Because the reason the governor originally proposed this was to help with high gas prices and the struggles there. And they say, well, that's a great solution for Salt Lake City or Salt Lake County, but what about Weber County or Duchesne or areas where they don't have this coverage? And then it kind of goes back to what Steve said, which is it's not saying it's a bad thing. It's just saying, is this where we want to direct that $25 million, or is there a better or a different way to use that money to help people that are being impacted by high inflation
do we use it to subsidize bus service, or do we use it to build tiny homes in West Salt Lake for the homeless? It's always about trade-offs.
I'd like to add to that. So we do struggle in the session. It's always the rurals versus the urbans, and it's not completely, but that's a very tense conversation constantly. And so, conversations like that, like, oh, well, if we give that to Salt Lake County, what do we get? Well, Salt Lake County drives a lot of the economy in the state of Utah. We are the tax people. We are putting lots of money into the state of Utah. So when they bring up conversations like that, I'm like, well, we have all the homeless, that all of them, just being hyperbole, don't quote me on that, fillet me, but we do have a large percent of the homeless here. We do have a large percent of the low income. We do have a large percentage of the diversity. So when they have conversations like that, it's frustrating because we are not as rural as Utah would like us to believe sometimes, and then other times they want us to be super urban. So we try to walk both those lines all the time. So that's also part of the problems that we are trying to mitigate as well, that rural urban push and pull. And so sometimes what's good for rurals is not good for urban, or what's good for urban is not good for rural. But for me as an educator, we have that same battle with how we're going to work in our schools, because what's good for urban schools isn't good for rural schools. But sometimes you just need to, take one for the team, because the state of Utah needs to move forward. And so that is a struggle. Like I think it would be better for the state of Utah. And I think rural communities would have to recognize that getting people to work without using their cars, keeping the environment cleaner and the air cleaner and the roads less congested would be a benefit for the state. Maybe not financially for some people, but the greater good would be there.
I'll hands up over here. Other question?
No, the question was answered. I just,
Okay.
the 25 million, investing in maybe new buses, or new routes, new routes that increase the availability.
I'm not sure I have a question so much anymore, but in general, I think all of this has been great conversation. I'm full support of all of those key issues of environment, obviously better transportation, homelessness, obviously affordable housing. I would take the half an acre of Kentucky bluegrass up if I could put 5 affordable units on my property in Sandy, but that's not really a thing, so we don't need to go there. But like totally shifting gears, we own 2 small businesses. They're alcohol driven, so alcohol policy in the legislature is something we track very, very closely. I know none of you are on that, we're on a revenue and tax situation. So I guess my question for you is, how do you see the improvements in that area of policy to help generate, because we're already giving you 230 million for the general fund, so it's a lot. But like, what can we do, or what can you do to help that industry, the hospitality industry specifically, be more able to support some of these funding projects?
So are you asking for more licenses?
More licenses is one issue.
Less restriction on how we serve alcohol?
All of it. I mean, it's a big issue. So I mean, there's a lot of reason, or even funding for more service to the DABS to have more stores, more support for employees, because their employees get $14 an hour. Not enough. They can't staff. So it's all of this that generates questions.
So I'm unique to the legislature because I'm one of the few people that drink out of the legislature. So that's,
Not in the legislature.
Yeah, well, no, I won't admit to that, just kidding, because that's against the law, just kidding.
There's no judgment here. Let's put it that way.
No, but it is interesting that we have a large population of our legislators that do not drink, and that create policies for people that do drink. And there are some people that really think that, recreational alcohol is a gateway drug to having bigger problems. And there is some research to support that. But, this has been a problem. As I was living up in Alta, I was a beer tender at the Gold Miner's Daughter, and people would frequently come in and say, oh, Utah's so crazy, I would never come here, and it's just, you can't get a drink anywhere. I'm like, you're sitting right here getting a drink. I don't know what you're talking about, And I'm from New York, and people are like, well, it's so much better in New York. I'm like, it's really not. Like, it's not that more permissive. So that mindset has been a gateway for us getting people to come here and visit. And we have eroded that mindset a lot. I mean, not tremendously, but we have moved in the right direction. The some of the other things like, buying the sidecar and getting the alcohol behind the bar. And so those things have changed. We have worked to make sure that we have more revenue opportunities. I know there's one opening up over here. And I know that we have increased the pay for our workers in the liquor stores. I would like to see more licenses, and I would like to see it become more fluid, because we in Utah do support more small businesses, and I think that this is a hurdle for us having our businesses thrive. Making money on food is one thing, making money on drinks really makes your business more successful and gives you that cushion you might need. So I would be willing to work on any of those things to a certain extent, because we do have to find the good balance of those things. When I was born in a small town in New York in Long Beach, and they had more bars than any place else, and so that wasn't a good balance. So I think that we could do better.
So over the dais, and the dais is just the desk, kind of like plug it. In the House of Representatives, it says Vox Populi, which in Latin means the voice of the people. So, and by design, we have to go back to get reelected every 2 years. Well, Steve and I do. Kathleen gets 4 years because, she's the House of Lords. But so, and the reason for that is we need to be receptive to our constituents. And so I guess my response, because I think you've got a group here that's pretty receptive to that. I actually ran a bill to allow beer delivery in homes a couple years ago, and didn't go anywhere. And so it's not us, but overwhelmingly the legislature is responding to what their constituents want. And at least at this point, they're not hearing that message, or they are not receptive to that message as much. So if we want to change that area, and I would say this with all the policies we've talked about, that legislators need to hear from their constituents what's important, and that what's critical. If they're hearing from their constituents, if they're getting elected by their constituents based on this, then they will respond. And if they still don't, there is that option. And I've heard, talks about this. There is an option of going around the legislature and having an initiative to do some of these things. It costs a couple $1 million. It would cost, time and effort. But if you feel like the legislature isn't receptive to this, that's always an option. And I have heard over the last few years more discussion about that.
I'll just comment real briefly. I think regardless of what type of business you operate, Utah has a very good business environment, and looking at lowering taxes, keeping regulation low, I think attracts a lot of businesses to our state. In the area of alcohol policy, it is like so many of the other areas we've talked about. Think of the whack-a-mole game that you've seen on Lagoon or whatever, where you're like, oh, we fixed that one, and then something else pops up. I spend most holidays out with Highway Patrol on their DUI stings, and it is one of the greatest policy frustration areas for me. I am running several DUI bills this session, including one that if a drunk driver takes out a parent or a guardian, they will be paying the child support until that child turns 18. I work a lot on suicide prevention policy, closely with a medical examiner. Alcohol is a huge, probably the most common denominator in our suicide deaths, in our domestic violence. So we have this balance of public safety, domestic violence, suicide, to the extent that we continue, if we open up, say, more liquor supermarkets or lowering the taxes. A recent article that I was just discussing yesterday talked about how alcohol is such a major factor in homelessness, and how the cost of that is a direct proportion as to how much society drinks. And so it's complicated. And, but we'll continue looking at, I just heard yesterday, we may need to expand some new bar licenses as the state grows. And I think that will probably be on the table this session.
Thank you. You bring up an interesting point of how alcohol use is related to so many of these social ills, which is also related to education, which we haven't really talked about a lot. I would like to see the governor and our legislator invest a lot in education. We've had this pandemic, we've had learning loss, we've had insecurity, we've had trauma. And I think the place where all of these things are mitigated the best is in our local schools. And I think that we really need to start investing in our local schools, because our local schools definitely mitigate many of these when they're hungry, when they're homeless, when they need eye care, dental care. I mean, all of these things, schools don't really ask to have them put upon them, but they've taken them on to make sure that the kids in our most vulnerable communities are being taken care of and have that continuity when they get to school. So with all the things we've spoken about, when you think about what touches each and every one of them, it's the kids that are going to our schools and the kids in our community that are the future that we need to start investing in. So with whatever we talked about today, think about the kids that are dealing with that problem as well. So I would like to see us invest more in our students, invest more in our schools, and in turn be investing more in our communities, because when our communities are thriving, taxes are going up, our houses are worth more, our communities are more even keeled instead of these drastic up and downs. So just bringing it around full circle. That's what we really need to do, invest in our communities, invest in our families.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for the great questions today, both online and here in chambers. Thank you for the great dialogue. Before we conclude, we'll have a few minutes, hopefully at the end, people can mingle and get direct contact or direct questions with your representatives if you haven't had your questions answered. But I want to share with you a few of the city's legislative priorities for this year. All throughout the year, we spend time together through the legislative session, during interim sessions. We have a lot of contact between the city and our state representatives to talk about issues that are important to Sandy. We've heard so much about it today, from housing and zoning. There is a big downward pressure from the state to advance density housing. But what we're seeing in Sandy is we're getting the density, but without the affordability. So we really need state policy and funding to create the affordability, because we have the builders and the developers who will build it and who will even buy in. But because the market acceleration of property values is so intense right now, you just can't fill that gap. We need state funding. So if there's state surplus, help us in Sandy build affordable housing. We have the place for it. We have the developers who will build it. We have the people who will buy it. We need workforce housing desperately for our police, firefighters, school teachers, plow drivers. All of our frontline workers cannot afford to live in Sandy. I think I've told each of you, we have a firefighter who lives in Idaho, comes to work and spends a few days at the station while on duty to 48 hours, and then goes home to Idaho. Most of our first responders live in Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs. What does that mean for Sandy's security and emergency preparedness? It's dicey. And if we have a big event, calling in our first responders is going to make our response time and our response services very, very challenging. So we don't want to wait until that happens. We want to start building workforce housing right now. Homelessness, we are very insulated in Sandy from homelessness. While we do have people without housing in Sandy, and we see a lot in our parks, and the typical response we hear is, well, let's round people up and put them on a bus downtown. Sandy is part of the solution and must be part of the solution in our counties, in our states, solving the shelter needs for everyone, whether it's, again, affordability or contributing or relieving pressure on the housing and homeless support services of Salt Lake County. We can and will play a role. We've mayors all around the valley have been working with our state legislators this year intensely to find winter home overflow shelter and long-term solutions for our unsheltered community in Utah. So I don't want that to just be brushed over, because we might not see it as much as you do in Salt Lake or South Salt Lake or
the Midvale shelter area, but we are definitely part of the responsibility and must be part of the solution on homelessness. We've heard so much today about the canyons. Please invest in the phased approach before you build a parking garage, 1,800 car parking garage along Wasatch. Invest in the ideas. We really need a legislative sponsored idea incubator ombudsman to collect and cultivate, evaluate, implement, and then collect data on what is going to work for our canyons. The goal of UDOT is to reduce traffic on Little Cottonwood Road by 30%. I firmly believe we can achieve that without investing massive infrastructure spending on a gondola, which will permanently alter the canyon landscape. Before we go that route, everyone agrees, as we've heard today, there's ways that we all acknowledged: tolling, technology, scheduling, burden sharing between the resorts, the resort consumer, and the local community. We need to work together. It would be wonderful if the state legislature had, like they've done with Senator Niederhauser, appoint czar, a canyon czar, I guess, for the lack of a better word. But we do need a clearinghouse because I have open office hours as your mayor every month, since I've begun them. I have people coming to me with great ideas for how we can solve canyons congestion, whether it's through technology, rideshare apps. These are all ideas, but with a little bit of validation and a little bit of investment, we can get the best ones off the ground. So to have a state-sponsored idea incubator coalition, that would be great for Sandy. It would be great for Cottonwood Heights, the communities that are most impacted by the canyon's congestion. Finally, the property taxes. 90 cities across Utah raised or had treatment taxation meetings to raise property taxes this year. I expect more will have them this coming year. So if there is, again, with that state surplus, if there could be a rebate, refund, credit, incentive, especially for fixed income, especially for seniors, to get some relief from property taxes that cities inevitably will be addressing this year. And last, our infrastructure costs, construction costs. If you called a plumber in the last 18 months, what used to be a $100 service call is now a $225 service call. Same with the city projects. Our projections, we used to create a contingency, like 10 or 20% contingency fee for what we estimated at the time of planning versus the time of construction. Now the contingency fees last year went up 40% over what we estimated. Now they're double. So how does that affect the city's bottom line? Our budget is being consumed by massive increases in personnel to keep our workforce in Sandy. Our construction costs, fuel costs, same way it hits your household budgets, it's hitting our city budget too. So any relief for property tax that the state can offer, not just eliminating or reducing the state's portion of the property tax bill, but helping our Sandy residents, especially our fixed income residents, would be very appreciated. So I'd love to talk to you more about that, and we will, and we have, but I just wanted to lay out those issues for the people who are listening. And what do you guys think today? What a great panel. So I invite each one of you here and listening today to connect directly and personally with your state representatives and with me as your mayor. We're all here to serve you. Thank you so much for the great conversation and participation, and getting the high sign from Kim Bell back here.
Contact information is on this program.
Oh, yes, please be sure to get a card, and again, check for the map at the back of the room, locate where you and your family are in which districts. So thanks again for coming, and thank you to our representative, Senator Reedy, Representative Spendlove, Representative Elison, and also Representative Cullimore. We had to leave a little early today. We value our relationship and all the service, your time, the time away from your families, and all that you give to the people of Utah. Thank you.